Welcome back to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. We're headed towards post Lakers, post finals, post bubble, post everything. And the Knicks have been in some basketball purgatory for quite some time. So we welcome in one of the experts on the Knicks, Jonathan Macri. He's the dean of the Knicks Film School. He hosts the KFS Pod, sends out the Knicks Film School newsletter, does a bunch of stuff. Jonathan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I am not comfortable with expert being in the same sentence, let alone or the same paragraph, let alone the same sentence as my name. But I appreciate the introduction. I'm looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. I'd like to pull out that expert title wherever I can. Butter you up a little bit.
Well, hey, might as well.
It's been a little bit of a weird time for the Knicks because, Jonathan, before we get into the meat of everything, it seems like they haven't played in like a year.
It feels, it's interesting because I think, not to get completely off the rails, but all of this has thrown all of our sense of time. Because whether we realize it or not, we kind of tell time by sports, right? And that's all out of whack. And it does feel like a long time. I mean, I remember it like it was yesterday. Sitting down and watching that last game against the Hawks, and like realizing, I think the news about Gobert came out, and maybe they were in the third quarter, and it started to set in like, oh, we're not going to see basketball for a while, are we? And it's just. Yeah, it's like it's been surreal because we're like there's been news consistently here and there, whether it's the coaching stuff or Chris Paul trade rumors or whatever. But it's been 7 months, nothing's happened. So yeah, it's been a lot.
I love that quote. We tell time by sports because it couldn't be more accurate for sports fans because that's really how we judge time. And now it's all completely in whack. But let's get right into it then. You mentioned it. The Chris Paul rumors obviously coming out recently. What is the incentive for the Knicks to make a deal for Chris Paul here? Because I personally look at this and I see a mistake waiting to happen in acquiring Chris Paul. What's your opinion on this?
My opinion on it is that it's one of the few conversations that Knicks fans could have where I don't think there's an unjustifiable answer. Doesn't mean there's not a right and a wrong answer because eventually, this will be proven out. Someone will be proven out to be right and someone will be proven out to be wrong, depending on what happens. But I think, he's such a unique player because forget about NBA history, when in sports history have you had a guy that is eminently available, is not only clearly one of the top 10 players in the sport, but is perhaps one of the 5 greatest in the history of the NBA in terms of making other people on the court better. And you could get him at essentially, I don't want to say for free because whatever it ends up being, a Dallas pick, Knox, Frank, we could get into specifics, but like, it's not commensurate with someone of his talent and his impact. So I think when you look at it from that perspective and you've been the Knicks and you've been so bad for so long, and the thing that I've been thinking of with Chris Paul is, how much does Leon Rose feel like, look, we could hire the coach, we could get a new front office, we could put all the lipstick on the pig that we want, but until we markedly improve on the court, this franchise will continue to be, I don't want to say doomed, but like it's going to be continuing to try to get out of quicksand. On the other side, your side, I think, is like, the 2021 draft is, I don't know if it's as good as the 2003 draft, but it's one of the 2 or 3 best in this century. And there is a clear, obvious, like smack you in the face path in front of the Knicks to just go out there, play your kids, lose 50 some odd games, and you're going to get a top, whatever it is, 5, 6, 7 pick. And if you get Chris Paul, that'll not necessarily, but could go by the wayside. So that's a very long-winded way of saying I don't think there is a wrong answer. But, I think there are arguments for each side.
So taking the Leon Rose perspective, you take over the reins, you have almost a blank canvas, and you're looking to prove that you're the right guy to lead the Knicks in a new direction. it seems like time and time again, and we could go over all the examples throughout Knicks history, they love the quick fix. They love the, as you mentioned, the lipstick on the pig.
Yeah.
Does this just feel too much like they're ditching the problem that's in front of them, which is they haven't developed talent?
Well, I think from that perspective, they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. And what I mean by that is, I I put a quote in one of my newsletters this week from someone that I'd spoken to with the Knicks that basically said they're trying to stop acting like a millennial at a casino or at a blackjack table or something. I forget what the exact quote was, but they have been in the effort to do what you just said and fix it quickly with big names or whatever. They threw development by the wayside. Example A, look at Kevin Knox and how they've mishandled him over the last 2 years. And if you want to even extend it to Frank Ntilikina, and you could even go back further with the draft picks that, didn't pan out or they, traded away too quickly. But I think this regime wants to value its assets, but I also think they are going to be honest and realistic about which assets are real assets and which assets are just, some people consider them to be assets because they happen to be the young players that are here right now, if that makes any sense. As far as like Paul specifically in comparison to some of the other stuff they've done, I think the difference is that he is, even at 35, just markedly better than anyone they've ever. I mean, we could go back to the Isaiah years. He went out and got Stephon Marbury and Eddie Curry, and then, Donnie Walsh brought in Stoudemire and Melo. And since then, there really hasn't. I mean, that's it. Those are the two times. Those are the two eras, unless you want to go back to like Frank Layden trying to, Othello Harrington or whatever. We don't need to go there. But anyway, those were two situations. The Marbury thing obviously didn't work because I think we learned over time Stephon Marbury was not a guy who's going to make anybody better. And they certainly didn't put anybody around him to make him better. And then the Melo thing, I've quibbled about that trade. I can't say how many times, but they were a Chauncey Billups contract option decision away from that situation being really interesting, because then they could have amnestied Amare, and instead of amnestying Billups to sign Tyson Chandler, like there was a world where that would have worked. So it's like I look at it we're not quite 1 for 2. We're like 0.5 for 2 or 0.75 for 2. So I don't think the concept of bringing a guy into New York to make the team better on the floor, A, and B, up the profile of the franchise is just fraught on its face, but you still need to execute it properly. And that's where it's like, what else are they going to do, or how are they going to still emphasize development even if they trade for Chris Paul? We'll see.
Jonathan Macri joining us here on One on One. You talked about player development, and you've written some good stuff on Kevin Knox throughout the past week about how he showed some good signs his rookie year, and your perspective was that he's just kind of the victim of the incompetence around the organization for the last couple of years.
Willing victim.
Exactly. So what are we missing with Kevin Knox? So what's there that the common eye doesn't see that maybe he could be a piece here?
I honestly, I don't know that there's much if you just go by last season, you really didn't see anything on the offensive end. I will say this, and some people disagree with this, and maybe it's just low standards, but he did improve markedly on the defensive end, which coming out of the draft, that was the biggest question on him. Everybody figured the scoring was going to be a given. He was a serviceable defender most of the time last year in a number of situations. On offense, he was, I don't even think complete disaster is a strong enough word. He really didn't do anything well. He didn't get to the foul line. He was hitting threes at a lower rate. He improved his shot profile a little bit. I think you have to go back to, and this is going to sound crazy, like forget about his rookie year. You have to go back to Kentucky and what he did then. And he showed some of those flashes as a rookie, but flashes like, Jeff Green's been getting paid contracts based on flashes for 15 years now, however long Jeff Green's been in the league. And Kevin Knox isn't even that good as Jeff Green during his flashes. So there's a long way to go. He's a talented kid. I still believe in the shot long term, which I think is probably the biggest thing, because ultimately, if you're 6'10" or 6'9", whatever he is, and you could shoot it, you're always going to have a job. And I think you could help teams if you could hold up on the other end. It's the other stuff where, we'll see. I mean, he has Kenny Payne there now. I'll say this, the Knicks are acting as if they still prioritize him as an asset. And I think he is that kind of line where, you draw the line of like, okay, are they really serious about development, or are they just saying they're serious? And I think Kevin Knox is going to be the test of that. How quickly they give him away, and do they give him away, or do they keep him?
Let's talk about another youngster, RJ Barrett, kind of the opposite of the equation. It seems like he has everything except for the shot.
Yeah.
What do you make of his ceiling after seeing him in year one? Obviously, we've talked about him being a superstar really since he was at Montfort Academy in high school.
Sure.
What do you make of the ceiling after seeing the product in year one?
I'm probably a little lower on RJ than most, because my default is what thing can you do better than 95% of the other people that play in the league? And the only answer that I could come to with RJ is he can get to the line better than anyone. But that said, I think that is a valuable skill. I think it's the most underrated skill, arguably, in the NBA, the ability to just manufacture free throws when you need them. And to be honest with you, I'm not even worried about the free throw percentage. I think he's going to be a 75% shooter from the line, if not more, when all is said and done. He's a hard worker. I guess I just worry about, you compare like Jimmy Butler, what we've seen from him over especially the last week and a half, but even, you go back to his entire career, Jimmy Butler's not a great finisher at the rim. But he's, he does enough, right, to keep defenses honest, to the point that if you don't foul Jimmy Butler, like, he's going to figure out, like, especially if he gets on a switch and whatnot. And that's the part from RJ that we haven't seen yet, where it's like, all right, you're going to put this little guy on me. If he doesn't foul me, I'm going to figure out a way to get the ball in the bucket. Did he do that on occasion last year? Absolutely. And I did a few RJ newsletters a while ago in which I clipped a lot of those. But it wasn't enough for me. But then you got to figure, how old is he now? He's 20? Jimmy Butler was 20 whatever. He went to 4 years of college by the time he came into the league. And it took him a few years of, reps. And by the way, it's the same coach. So I'll say this. I think Tibbs' hire makes my ceiling, raises my ceiling for RJ in terms of, like, what is his ceiling? I think he can make an all-star team, a couple all-star teams, which would be great. I'd sign for that right now, if I'm being honest.
Well, you brought it right up into my next question. It feels like an eternity ago that Tom Thibodeau was hired. But he's yet to coach a game for the Knicks. He is the new Knicks head coach. What did you make of that hire? Personally, I look at the floor. I thought they made the hire too early, and I even thought there were better options on the table. Example one being Kenny Atkinson. What did you make of the decision to go in the Tom Thibodeau direction?
I thought it was the safest pick, safest choice on the board, so to speak. And to be honest with you, I think even if, and again, I think there was a real incentive for them to make if you believed he was the right guy, I think it was the incentive at the time. I think it was the right move to make the hire then, because someone would have snatched him up. And I think all you have to look at is see the other jobs that are still open as proof of that, or evidence of that, potentially. But I think even comparing him against Doc or Billy Donovan, I still think he's safer than those guys, because when Tibbs has been at his best, put aside the personnel stuff, put aside the, maybe not being the modern coach in terms of how you have to handle, I use the word handle in air quotes, today's player. Put aside that stuff. From an X's and O's perspective, from a getting his team prepared perspective, from all of that stuff, like the traditional, like, this is what a coach is supposed to do, he's unparalleled. And with all due respect to anybody who's like, oh, he didn't modernize his defensive schemes in Minnesota, like, that dude could still coach defense. He knows what works. The personnel he had, which, again, partially his fault because he built that team in some respects. He knows what he's doing. I think the way and this is why I'm ultimately in favor of the hire. It's a two-pronged thing. He's close with Leon Rose and Worldwide Wes, and he trusts them and they trust him. And there's overall there's a trust factor there, which then leads into the second thing of, okay, you're not great at relating to today's player. Well, we're going to go hire Kenny Payne. We're going to go hire Johnny Bryant, who guys like Dame Lillard, Donovan Mitchell, and Anthony Davis and Karl Anthony Towns swear up and down by, right? As guys, like, as people, as human beings. So again, the Knicks trying to have their cake and eat it too. It's like, let's get Tibbs and let's hire people to make up for the things that Tibbs is clearly not good at. Will it work? Will that trust hold up, amidst losing? We'll see. But I think they thought this thing out in a very particular way. So I'm hopeful, but we'll see. Good coaches have come here and failed.
One more. Take your crystal ball and look 3-4 years into the future. We talked about RJ Barrett. Mitchell Robinson also comes to mind. Who on this roster remains part of the next Knicks winner?
I mean, if you're saying 3 years down the line.
The Knicks are a winning team 3 years from now. Who's still here and contributing in some fashion?
Oh, I mean, I'd put the over-under at 0.5. Aside from Mitchell Robinson and aside from RJ Barrett, I put the over-under at 0.5 players, and I would take the under.
Wow.
And that, look, anything could happen. But the only, and maybe that's a little unfair because you figure out one out of Knox. I shudder to say his name, Dennis Smith Jr., because who knows if Dennis Smith Jr. is going to be here, by the opening of the season. So you could say the same thing for Frank, say the same thing for Knox. It's like any of these guys could be shipped out tomorrow, but at the same time, assuming that all of them will be gone and that none of them are going to get signed to a second contract, maybe I'm being a little unfair. If I had to pick a second guy that would be here, I'd probably pick Frank, because I think, as much as, God, he's had 9 lives in terms of how many times they've wanted to ship him out. I think he'll sign his next contract at a fair number. I don't know if that's going to get worked out this summer. We'll see. Probably not. But if they're smart, they'll lock him up for something like 3 years, $21 million as an extension. And I think he would take that. So I guess I would say Frank, put a gun to my head, other than the big two.
Before we wrap up, then, just want to follow up here. We mentioned 3 years from now, this team potentially being a winner. And if it's only going to be 2 guys that are here contributing, if you think it's likely that this team is probably not in a position to contend 3 years from now. And that obviously could change if you had a superstar and obviously the draft coming up. But is 3 years a realistic time slot for this window of potentially winning to open up?
I mean, I don't think you have more than a 3-year runway in the NBA today. I don't think you have more than a 3-year runway in sports today. I mean, the NFL, it used to be like 5-year rebuilds at the very least with new coach, and now like that's been reduced. And in the NBA, it's like, look at Brooklyn. They turned that thing around in 2 years. They completely changed the culture of the organization. Well, I shouldn't say the culture of the organization. They completely changed the perception of the culture of the organization in 2 years. But not maybe useless pointing out the difference, but neither here nor there. I think they will, within 3 years, they will start winning games. Whether or not they build something that is sustainable and has the ceiling of a real contender, I think is a different conversation. And that is like, that's tough to do. There's only so many teams that do it. They still have the advantage of being in New York. No one has been able to take advantage of that advantage in 20 years, other than Donnie Walsh a little bit. But I'm hopeful. I'm more hopeful than not. These people seem to know what they're doing. I'll say that from everything that I've heard. So
that's Jonathan Macri. You can follow him on Twitter at JMacriNBA. Appreciate
JC
a few
Macri.
minutes. JC Macri.
JC Macri NBA. Sorry, you got to remember the C. It's okay.
Add that C or else you won't find him. JC Macri NBA. One-on-one. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate a few minutes.
Of course. Thanks for having me.